Can we all stand for a moment of personal reflection, please? Thank you. Councillor Gardner, can you lead us in the national anthem, please?
O Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love, in all thy sons command, car ton bras sait porter l'épée, il sait porter la croix. Ton histoire est une épopée des plus brillants exploits. God keep our land glorious and free. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
Merci. I'd like to start by acknowledging that we are gathering on the traditional territory of the Mohawk people of Akwesasne. Madam Clerk, roll call.
Mayor Bernadette Clément.
Présente.
Councillors Claude McIntosh. Elaine McDonald.
Present.
Sid Gardner.
Here.
Dean Hollingsworth.
Present.
Caroline Hébert.
Présente.
Councillors Maurice Dupel.
Present.
Glenn Grant.
Present.
Todd Bennett.
Present.
Justin Towndale.
Present.
And Eric Bergeron.
Present. Additions, deletions, or amendments? Councillor McIntosh.
Yeah, I pulled from consent item number 1.
Consent the proclamation.
Yeah.
And-
Councillor,
Go ahead.
Councillor Elaine McDonald?
I was going to do the same thing.
Okay. Anything else from council on the additions, deletions? Madam Clerk?
Then I have an amendment. RFP item number 2, 18P19, collection, processing, and marketing of recyclable material and collection of curbside waste to be dealt with immediately following the adoption of minutes.
Do we need a motion for that? Council okay with that? All right. Adoption of the agenda.
As amended.
Pardon? Oh, as amended. Thank you, Councillor Grant. Do you move it? Councillor Grant, seconded by Councillor Elaine McDonald. All in favor? Thank you. Any disclosure of interest? Seeing none, we'll go to Committee of the Whole. I need a motion there. Councillor Bennett and Councillor Dupel, all in favor? Adoption of the minutes.
The following minutes are presented for adoption. If there are no corrections, the minutes are recommended for approval, and they are the minutes of January 10th and of January 14th.
Councillor Bennett, Councillor Gardner, any discussion? All in favor? Thank you.
And so we will deal with our RFP number 2, request for proposal 18P19, collection, processing, and marketing of recyclable material and collection of curbside waste. The recommendation is that RFP 18P19 be awarded to Environmental 360 Solutions Incorporated from Pickering at the total contract price of $24,089,466.73. The recommendation includes awarding option 2, modified level of service for the collection of recyclable material and collection of curbside solid waste, and option A, use of corporation's material recovery facility for recycling processing.
Councillor Grant, you make the motion? Seconded by Councillor Hollingsworth. That is at page 114 of your books, just for ease of reference. Any debate? Councillor Bergeron.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The recommendation includes awarding option 2, modified level of service. Is that included in the motion that was deferred 2 weeks ago?
Madam CAO.
That is the same option that we presented 2 weeks ago.
Are we approving also awarding option 2? Because we just received that document at the last meeting.
Madam CEO?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I will refer the question to Mr. St. Marseille, but maybe just before that, we will be coming back to council with a communication report on a bylaw to outline some of our recommendations of components to have within that bylaw. And so with that, I'll refer to Mr. St. Marseille for any additional comments.
That is correct, through you, Madam Mayor. Option 2 was recommended to bring forward by administration, not the least of which it represents over $1 million in saving over the life of the contract compared to option 1.
So, I mean, my question is are we voting on option 2 tonight? Or are we voting on the approval of this RFP? Because I consider them two different things. Maybe I'm wrong.
Okay, Mr. St. Marseille?
Through you, Madam Mayor, certainly within, so with the recommendation, there could be an option to go with option number 1, which is actually more pricey over the life of the contract compared to option number 2. Because option number 2 has additional efficiencies associated with waste diversion, recycling efficiency, and again, the ultimate goal is to be consistent with our solid waste management master plan, as well as to try to extend the life of our landfill site as long as we can.
I appreciate that, but I guess my question is, option 2 is for us to decide in the future. These are modified levels of services. We have not decided what these modified levels will be, correct?
Through you,
Yes.
Madam Mayor, that is correct, although there are some components within option 2 that still can come back for council's input. So the items that are key within option 2, I think Mr. St. Marseille, that would include the mandatory carts for our IC&I clients. It would also speak to, I think, some of the efforts we want to do for recycling and diversion. And are there any other components that?
Yes, through you, Madam Mayor. So the items within the option 2 consideration are bag limits, so up to 6 bags for consideration. Again, this would be part of a subsequent bylaw for council consideration in terms of the ramp up or phase in of that. The other significant component is bulky waste. So again, the solid waste management master plan recommended that we move away from bulky waste collection. So that's also not included in option number 2.
So again, I will ask then, for clarity, we are not deciding those bylaws tonight. We are just deciding that we want to talk about bylaws in the future. Correct?
Through you, Madam Mayor, through option 2, what that contract does do is it talks about a bag limit. So we've got an upside limit of 6 bags and also the removal of bulky waste. So those would be 2 components that are important when you're considering option 2. If you wanted to reconsider bulky waste, that's not within that option.
Can you clarify?
Mr. St. Marseille?
If I could add as well, Madam Mayor, the other consideration that would be brought back to council would be the notion of mandatory recycling. So that would be part of a waste bylaw, but that would have to be brought back to council for consideration if it's going to be mandatory or not. In other words, would waste be collected only if there was a recycling component, whether or not it's a blue box with a single can or paper in it or something like that? We'd have to work out the details and bring back options for council's consideration. So that is certainly something that we would bring back as part of options for consideration with the solid waste management bylaw.
Thank you. It would seem to me that these are bylaws that have not yet been defined. And so it seems strange to me that it's included in an RFP awarding. And I appreciate option 2 was part of the recommendation that we received 2 weeks ago, but we were not asked to approve it. We were asked to accept it as a council. This bylaw is asking us to approve it, it seems. clerk question, I suppose?
I think it's more of a CAO question.
So this RFP, we would like to get awarded and then come back with details on the bylaw for council. So with respect to whether it's mandatory carts, what we want for bag limits, whether or not you would like mandatory recycling, all of those components do not have to be decided subject to this RFP this evening. The bulky waste component, though, has been removed from in option 2. So the difference between option 1 and option 2 for tonight, the bulky waste component, and then also the mandatory carts for our IC&R clients.
So we as a council cannot decide on that if we approve this. It's already part of option 2.
That is included within option 2. Items that council can decide would be when we come back with another report, if we're looking at the carts, how those carts might be procured, how we might be able to provide assistance with those commercial businesses that might have to obtain the carts. We can also come back with options with respect to bag limits, whether council would like to start with a 6-bag limit or something different. We can also come back with discussions regarding mandatory recycling.
Okay, it seems to me these are all things that would be or should have been included before an RFP, but I digress. You are asking us to, or the motion is to approve option 2 at the same time as awarding this contract. Thank you.
Any further discussion, debate? Councillor Elaine McDonald?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And I have to say, I appreciated very much the deferment of this material from our last meeting, because we certainly have had a lot of, I'd say, a more intensive education on exactly what's at stake. And I'm personally very committed to supporting the recommendations, both parts of them, because at the end of the day, no matter how difficult it is for us to work through changes, at the end of the day, we have to opt for the proposal that brings the greatest value to our residents. And I don't just mention value in terms of the financial return or savings that we can make. I understand that over the course of the 7-year contract, this is actually going to be $1 million less a cost to us than the alternative would be. But I think the most important thing is the value we're really getting out of this is we are making a breakthrough in our diversion rate, which has literally stalled. For years, we've been diverting 30% of what could be diverted, and our landfill site is obviously experiencing a shortening of its life with every successive year where we fail to change that ratio. And we've been stalled there. We've been stalled there for years. Now, Environmental 360 has come in with a proposal to us to ramp that up to 60%, which is a tremendous advantage to us, given the fact that among many municipalities in Ontario, a 30% diversion rate is an abysmal rate. And we lose a lot of revenue through the materials that we're not diverting and not selling. So I think in terms of financial value, but even more important, the environmental value of this recommendation on the part of administration, it is, I think it behooves us to accept it and work through the change. However, you know, it'll be some dislocations along the way and people resist change, but I think that if we're being conscientious and opting for value for our residents, then the way is clear. This is what we have to do if we're going to go forward. Thank you.
Any further comment, questions? Councillor Dupel?
So at the last meeting, we deferred this because I didn't feel, I'll speak for myself, I didn't feel like we had enough information. So we have received lots of information. I sent out a list of 12 questions that I wanted answered. We have gotten a legal opinion. So I think it's important that people know that we've done that, and I think that with some education to moving forward to the public, that when it comes to an RFP, once that RFP closes, our hands are tied as a council. So you're not given very much of a choice, but hopefully administration's going to prepare that for the public so that they can see the process for an RFP. But it's certainly something council needs to look at moving forward, and to what kind of limits that we might want to put in place or work with administration to correct that for the future when we're dealing with such large contracts.
Any further debate, comment? Is everybody ready for the vote? Councillor Hébert?
I'll say something, if you
Of course.
don't mind. I'll be brief. Thank you for Councillor DePel for mentioning some of the background work that has been happening since the last meeting. We did get an opinion, and I also echo the comments of Councillor McDonald. I think going forward, these decisions will certainly help us with our diversion rate, which is critical. I mean, we talk cost a lot, but I think we always need to bring it back to environment, which is a big cost. It's a crisis, and we're not addressing it. So, of course, there's been some controversy around this decision, and my concern is that we don't embrace these new changes to the way we recycle and dispose of our waste. And I would really encourage our residents to really take the time to embrace some of these changes when it comes to bag limits. We're very much behind the eight ball on that. There's only 2 municipalities in Eastern Ontario that does not have a bag limit. I had bag limits in other municipalities when I was just a child, so it's time we do this. It's time we move forward. Yes, for the landfill costs. Yes, for the diversion rate, but our municipality is just creating far too much waste. So I'm happy to support that, and happy that through some communications in the near future there will be some more education through the RFP and tender process. And I've voiced this before, but I think, and I hope administration notes this, going forward when it comes to a tender or an RFP, if we can add a environmental impact criteria. I don't know if I have to bring forth a policy to make that part of every tender or every RFP. I know we can't say, due to the free trade agreement, the Canada Free Trade Agreement, we cannot say or choose a local organization. However, we can certainly put in criteria that will help us reduce our environmental impact, and usually favor a more local option instead of trucking in product, let's say, from across the province for a little bit more of a financial cost. We might find a more local supplier where the environmental impact is significantly less than maybe the savings of a few dollars from across the province. I think this is a way that we can make a difference on our environmental impact, but also certainly work closer to our neighbors and local businesses when it comes to the tender and RFP process. So please take note, and if a motion needs to come from me, I will do that. Maybe I'm looking for a bit of direction here. Does a motion need to come for those kinds of directions?
So a discussion about our purchasing policies and a review to include environmental impact would be perfectly in order at a later date, and should be the subject of a motion, so that we can kickstart it with a report and have further discussion around this table. So that would be in order. At a later date, you can craft a motion and we'll go from there.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Towndale.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I honestly expected a bit more debate here tonight, but I think that we spent 2 hours with our lawyer discussing this issue, and everyone's kind of talked out, to be honest with you. But that's the thing. We deferred this to get more information, have our questions answered, as Councillor DePel said, and we did get those answers. This is reminiscent of 2015 when we had a similar situation in front of us, 2 proponents, an RFP, and we got a legal opinion on that as well, and it told us, wow, we just don't really have much leeway in this. We have to go one way, or we open the corporation up to a very serious legal standpoint. We can't do that. We just can't do that. We have a responsibility here to the city, and unfortunately that requires us to accept this. But I think, at the end of the day, the comments made by my colleagues, Councillor McDonald, Councillor Hébert, do touch on the fact that there is an improvement here potentially in what is presented. So I have to support this. Thank you.
Any further comment, debate? Councillor McIntosh.
2 weeks ago, I was in no position to make a decision on this, and I was one of the councillors that voted to defer it. And I think what's in this document here, which we saw tonight in camera, convinced me that, gave me the facts and figures, and also how an RFP really works. And really, we don't have much choice when it comes to the legalities of RFPs. And, I can now look people in the face and say, I made it an informed decision. 2 weeks ago, I had no idea where we're going with this.
Further comment, debate? Ready for the question? All in favor?
Recorded vote, please. Can we do?
Recorded. Yes, Madam Clerk.
Councillors Claude McIntosh?
Yes.
Elaine McDonald?
Yes.
Sid Gardner?
Yes.
Dean Hollingsworth?
Yes.
Caroline Hébert?
Yes.
Councillors Modeste Dupel?
Yes.
Glenn Grant?
Yes.
Todd Bennett?
Yes.
Justin Towndale?
Yes.
Éric Bergeron?
Opposed?
And Madam Mayor?
Yes. So I will say this at this juncture. I want to thank Council for their patience. That was the last meeting we had 2 weeks ago. Was very long, very difficult. A lot of you were in this room, and you sat by very patiently and very peacefully to listen to this discussion, and you're doing so again, and I appreciate that. I can also tell you that this was a very difficult debate for this council. We are going to be releasing a press release later on with some more detail about the rationale and the reason for our decision. It's frustrating for you because this discussion was held in camera tonight with our lawyer, and so that's, I can understand, frustrating for the public, but we are going to be releasing some information to explain a bit further how we decided. And I can tell you that our main concern really was around the employees. This was the hardest part of this. I agree with Councillor Elaine, change is hard and we resist it, but we particularly resist it when it involves people and their livelihood. So we recognize that, but we are moving forward now in a direction that we hope will increase the diversion rate significantly, and which we hope will save money in terms of our landfill and preservation of our landfill. These are difficult discussions to have, but we've had them tonight, and we thank you for how respectfully you have been in this room tonight and 2 weeks ago. Merci. Okay, next item.
Under consent, proclamation of Eating Disorder Awareness Week. The recommendation is that council proclaim the week of February 1st to 7th, 2019 as Eating Disorder Awareness Week in the city of Cornwall. Item 3, proclamation of Optimist International Day. Recommendation is that council proclaim Thursday, February 7th as Optimist International Day in the city of Cornwall. And the last item, building permit fee study and proposed fee changes, interim report, with a recommendation that council receive this report.
Need a motion for the consent items. Councillor Grant? Councillor Bennett? All in favor? Resolutions?
We have none, Madam Mayor.
Unfinished business reports.
Parking restrictions and bicycle lanes on LeMay Street, with a recommendation that the bicycle lanes, as well as the parking restrictions required for the safety of the users, remain along LeMay Street as previously endorsed and approved by council and by the municipal class environmental assessment for the improvements and extension of LeMay Street.
Motion? Councillor Towndale? Councillor Elaine McDonald? Any discussion? Councillor Hollingsworth?
I'm not going to support the motion, Your Worship. I realize bike lanes are a new thing and we want bikers to be able to do whatever, but I think parking, the local residents have said they would like to be able to, parking is kind of something those of us who have it take for granted. And I kind of think that parking is kind of part of the deal. And to remove it is a disservice to the local people who live on that street. So I'm not going to support the motion.
Okay. Councillor Bergeron?
So, I've played soccer my whole life. I know it probably not evident right now.
We're not making
But
any comments,
Optimist
Councillor
Park
Bergeron.
is at the end of LeMay Street, and I can tell you I have parked there hundreds of times. in the first drawing that I saw, LeMay Street extended all the way to McConnell. When is that part of this plan?
Mr. Saint-Marseille?
Through you, Madam Mayor. So the extension of LeMay Street is going to be phased over a few different years. So the first section that is being referred to in this petition is so-called Phase 1. The next phase is Phase 2, which carries it just to the north of our municipal works yard. And then Phase 3 ultimately, as part of the environmental assessment that was undertaken, would carry it out to McConnell. So this is a major arterial road that has been identified through our infrastructure master plan and critical infrastructure. So the question about Optimus Park, so that section is being built adjacent to Optimus Park right now. And one of the things that we heard as part of the outreach is that we need additional parking at Optimus Park. So that is being included as part of the construction that is nearly complete and will be finalized this spring.
Thank you. I'm glad to hear it because Optimus Park is one of our major arteries of people coming into the city. 4 nights a week, it's packed full of cars from Ottawa, and they're parking on the street, in gutters. You know, it's really a poor showing of what the city of Cornwall is, and every 2 nights a week I see that. So if that's factored into this report, then I can support it. But otherwise, I would have not supported it. So I'm glad for clarification. Thank you.
Councillor Elaine McDonald?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and I support the recommendations as well. I think that I'm glad to see the list here, the enumeration of all the streets where there is parking within walking distance of LeMay Street. And at the end of the day, it's 2019, and the cars have to make room for the bicycles. This isn't about today, it's about tomorrow. We have to share the road, and that means that cars may have to give up the right to park as conveniently as they like, but there's plenty of parking in the area, and as Mr. Saint-Marseille said, there'll be additional parking spaces at Optimus Park, so this is a commendable initiative.
Councillor Bass?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll be brief. I just second the comments from Councillor McDonald, but just a quick comment. For far too long, we've designed our communities, our streets around cars, when really we should be designing our communities around people. So this certainly accommodates people versus cars. So I think there's a statistic out there, the amount of streets versus, park space and walkability, streets that are walkable, and it's quite disgusting how we've just been focusing on accommodating vehicles and commuters. So of course I'd support this, and then further push the bicycle master plan as well. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Councillor McIntosh?
Clarification, there's no parking on either side, north and south?
Mr. Saint-Marseille?
On the map?
Through you, Madam Mayor, that is correct. So before the reconstruction, there was parking only on the north side. And as part of our public consultation process and infrastructure open houses pre-construction, we had indicated that the plan was to ultimately remove parking on both sides so we could accommodate the bike lanes.
So if I have somebody coming to visit me, they have to park on a side street to walk to my house? Winter, summer, spring, and fall?
So it is year-round, but at this time of year, through you, Madam Mayor, we have other bylaws that also supersede in terms of parking restrictions on the street
Not in
in the
daytime.
winter. Overnight parking,
No, but I'm talking
excuse me,
daytime.
yes.
So if I have somebody on a day like tomorrow coming to visit me, and she has, say, my 89-year-old grandmother, she's got to park and walk 60 yards to my front door. I think that's totally unfair.
Well, that was, through you, Madam Mayor, part of the consultation that we did in terms of having the adjacent local streets and opportunities to drop people off with the residents and then go and
People
park
on the May were
would also be available. Pardon me?
Were the residents in favor of this? Were the residents in favor of having no parking on each side?
They are aware of that proceeding.
It's not the question.
Absolutely.
I said,
Well,
are they in favor?
there was, through you, Madam Mayor, there is a process that can be followed in terms of a Part 2 order. Once the municipal environmental study report is filed, there's a 30-day public consultation period above and beyond the or pardon me, public feedback period, above and beyond the public consultation that we did. There was no request during that period to challenge what was being proposed.
There's nowhere else in the city where we allow parking where there's a bike lane?
There are, through you, Madam Mayor, there are situations where, depending on the type of street configuration, I don't have any offhand,
Yeah.
but this is an arterial road network, and that's why it's crucial.
I'm not in favor, especially in the winter, of having people walk, you know, that far to get to a front door. You know, when you don't have any bicycles between late November or early November till probably April, it just doesn't sound right. Anyway, I'll vote against it.
Councillor DePel?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I had the same questions as my colleague, Councillor McIntosh. So the restrictions would be put in 12 months a year, and so there's no opportunity to just do the bike lane on one side and leave parking on one side, or through you to Mr. St. Marseille?
Mr. Saint-Marseille?
Through you, Madam Mayor, again, through the environmental assessment process, which has, and the report was filed and accepted by the province in terms of the go-forward plan, that was the determination of that process. So we cannot change that based on the public, or pardon me, based on the provincial acceptance of the report. That's part of the class environmental assessment process.
I'll vote against it, Madam Mayor.
Councillor Bennett?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just a couple of comments. When I first started to read this report, at first I was against it because of parking. And then I started to realize, as I read further on, this was going to be a major arterial road connecting some very busy streets. And so my thought process then went from the main to Marlow, where Marlow, there's no parking along that street anywhere. And you will have the same situation where if you want to visit somebody along Marlow, you have to park along some of those streets to get there. So it's creating the same situation. So the fact that there's bike lanes, and people do ride bikes year round. I saw 4 of them today. It shocked me. It was so cold they're riding. But they do use them. And it's about safety for me. So we can't have people parking on a road that's going to be eventually going straight through. We'll be busy, handle a lot of traffic, and I don't think we want people walking up between cars in front of some cars that will probably be moving along at a pretty good clip. So as I read further into this report, it sold me on the idea, and I'll be in favor of it.
Any further discussion? Ready for the question?
Recorded vote, Madam Mayor.
Yes. Madam Clerk?
Councillors Claude McIntosh,
No.
Elaine McDonald,
Yes.
Sid Gardner,
Yes.
Deans Hollingsworth,
Oh, thank you.
Caroline Hébert,
Yes.
Councillors Maurice Dupel,
No.
Glenn Grant,
Yes.
Todd Bennett,
Yes.
Justin Towndale,
Yes.
Éric Bergeron,
No.
and Madam Mayor.
Yes. It carries. Just going to say I agreed with Councillor Bennett's analysis. Thank you for that. Next item.
Response to petition regarding transit service revisions. The action recommended is that council receive this report.
Motion, Councillor McIntosh, seconded by Councillor Towndale. Any discussion? Yes, Councillor Elaine McDonald.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And my question is purely for the sake of the television audience, because I read the report, and unfortunately, it's not up on the screen. And we do have Mr. Tapp here, fortunately, who can maybe speak to the highlights of the report. This was something that I and the others on the Transit Committee supported. And even though there have been some dislocations again, there have been some changes for people in some of the routes, the overall effect has been very positive. And I'd love to have Mr. Tapp just explain what they are, because people, unfortunately, maybe were taken by surprise when the changes happened after the consultation period. And so if people could realize the benefits, it might make it easier for people to accept the loss of some stops. And
Thank you, Mr. Tapp, for coming to the mic.
Thank you. I thought I'd hidden back there, might be
It's
better up there.
much better.
So the highlights of it, I mean, we put a lot of work into trimming back the routes in order to keep them on time. And that was the major focus of this. It's in the spirit of the Transit Master Plan, et cetera. So we knew that there was going to be some people affected, especially when you're moving bus stops. Consultation, if you ask somebody if we remove their bus stop, we know what they're going to say. So we did promised to take surveys. We did that. Very few people got on in those areas over the time we took the surveys. And some of the author of the petition, by the way, I spoke to on the very same day that it was received by city council or city hall. She was explained all of the reasons behind the petition, and she seemed to be fine with it when I hung up with her, but at the same time, here we are dealing with the petition. I think in the consultations I've had with the people involved, it seemed that there was a lot of people advocating for people who may use the bus and not necessarily people that were using the bus. That being said, by the way, we are still monitoring the situation, and if we need to take some further action, there are some action items that were marked in the report. If there's gonna be further action needed, it will be taken, and that is, we're waiting for feedback from individuals for specific areas that are needed at specific times. The rush hour will be out between 12 and 5. We can't really do anything because that's the reason we brought it back. If I look at that particular route on the petition, there's been 2 other routes that we did take back. Heard some feedback, both good and bad, from the public all the way around. But that particular route, it goes by the hospital. It's got 3 more lights than it did 5-7 years ago when we put that in there. There's a lot of things that slow it down. There's other reasons that I've mentioned in the report of why the buses are slowed down. We have people traveling with mobility aids such as wheelchairs on the conventional service. We encourage that, of course, but we also recognize that it does slow it down. So it became a safety factor for our drivers. We're getting the speed around town, and that was just not the right thing to do. Timing of it, of the implementation, of course, we mentioned that we had a late council. We can't spend money until council gives us approval to do such. And then we went into a work stoppage. So we missed some windows of opportunities that need to coincide with collective agreement clauses that we have in place, driver's bids, et cetera. So thus the reason we just couldn't, after speaking with the staff at Cornwall Transit, could not see us going through another winter with the amount of complaints that were coming into Cornwall Transit for late buses. And complaints where we're missing complete trips, affecting ridership, revenues, et cetera. So that's the gist of it in a nutshell.
Is that, did you
Oh,
follow up?
Right, no.
Did you want to follow up?
Actually, I just want to respond to that, but I've spoken already, so.
Okay. I have Councillor Towndale, then Councillor Gardner.
Thank you,
I
Madam
have Bergeron last.
Just a question about the petition. Last meeting when this was presented, I asked how many people had signed it because the entire thing was blacked out and we could not actually see that number. So I was wondering if I could get that update to this meeting.
Mr. Tapp?
There was 18 people who signed a petition. Only 3 actual people had numbers or addresses on it, so we're not sure where the other people were from.
Thank you.
Councillor Gardner and then Councillor Bergeron.
Thank you. Through you, Madame la Mayoress. First of all, the people I spoke to who were taking the bus were frustrated about it being late all the time. So those are people going to work that wanted to get to work on time. That's good. The other thing was, I wanted to ask you, there were some suggestions made on the petition by some of the users. Were any of those taken into consideration and implemented by the buses?
The suggestions that were addressed in the report, there was 3 that I seen recommendations or suggestions.
Yeah.
Right off the top, one was to put experienced drivers on that particular route, and as I mentioned, one of the drivers just reached a milestone of 25 years, so I would call that an experienced driver. That's not going to have an effect on the drivers go through training, and that's not believe me, that's not the reason why buses are running late. The other one was combining 3 stops, so you'd still have to go up into the area that we're trying to save the time to going to, and combining 3 stops. You still got to travel up there. We're talking about a savings of between 2.5 to 3 minutes per trip. And it doesn't sound like a lot as the person who, the author of the petition mentioned, but said, well, I don't mind being late 2 minutes, and nobody would, but after 6 trips, it's now 20 minutes, and et cetera, et cetera. So and thus we're missing complete trips. I think the third one was she had mentioned that we should have an extra bus available, and we
Yes.
we did, and still do, and it just wasn't working because this is just one area of the city where we trimmed back. There was two other areas in order to keep the buses on time. And what you're looking at is you need to get to the downtown terminal on time in order to make that transfer. If you don't, well, then that person's waiting. And so if one bus is late, the whole system can be late. One bus, we might be able to deal with it, but when we had 2 and 3, then it was really causing an effect on the transit system.
So you've gotten back to some of these people to advise them of why you made your decisions, or why you didn't take some of the suggestions?
I haven't, because there is no contact names on
But
the.
publicly, I seem to have seen you on TV not too long ago.
Well, we've had, I've had some press, media interviews and on Kojiko explaining the reasons behind our moves and whatnot. But as far as the individuals go, no, except for the author, and I've spoken to her.
So that our friends over there are the ones that you need to approach to make sure that everybody knows what's going on.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Bergeron?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Through you to Mr. Tapp. First of all, thank you. This report, I hope all our reports are as concise, as clearly written, and, I mean, you go down to the individual rider almost. It's fantastic. This is the kind of info I love in terms of making decisions. My question, I suppose, is we have received a petition, and by this report, we're talking about 2 citizens of the city of Cornwall who are identifiable on this report. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
So I suppose my question comes to administration. Is there a process for receiving, because when we received, to Councillor Towndo's question, when we received this, we didn't know how many people had signed this. If you're telling me that it's an author and one other person, that seems like a lot of time and coordination to respond to a petition. I'm wondering if there is a process in place for a number of people that need to sign a petition, and that they need to be citizens of Cornwall to sign that petition.
Madam CAO, do you want to respond? Madam Clerk?
Madam Clerk? Through you, Madam Mayor, we don't have a minimum of signatures on a petition. Normally, what happens with the petition, the proponent would contact us, and we would let them know that we need the name, address, phone number, now email address in this day and age, and a signature. This document here was delivered to us mostly with signatures. They were readable, but they didn't have the contact information. And so usually we would remove the contact information and signature. Because the names were signed just in signature, most of that information had been redacted.
Okay, so you can sign a petition with one person, is the, correct?
If I received a petition with 1 or 2 names, I would contact that proponent and ask for probably more signatures than that.
So not to go back to it, but only 2 people on this petition qualified as citizens of Cornwall.
Well, we're identifiable.
We're
The others were signatures. I could read them. Their contact information was not there.
Okay, sounds like we need to address that policy in general, but I really appreciate the conciseness of this feedback. It really clarified what you did to respond to it. Thank you.
Any other comment? I'll just like to say Mr. Tapp is a long-time report writer. So he's been doing it quite a while. I did have just a comment about petitions. I'm not sure about this one. I'm aware of it, and I'm aware that people were upset when there were changes, of course, made to the route. It may be that some people were vulnerable in this situation as well, and so could have had some assistance from people in terms of getting onto a petition. Just a comment that I'll make. Just a question, Mr. Tapp. Have organizations followed up with you now? Just can you remind me as to whether organizations have come back to you? I understand the names, the author of the petition, but
No, the 2 organizations that I did speak to.
Yeah.
Both promised to give me individual names so that I could contact them and if need be, take care of an individual need. I do have a plan in place if necessary.
Okay.
But I don't wanna put something in place and just to find out that it's not good for those organizations.
Right.
So, no, I'm waiting for those two organizations
Okay,
to get back to me with more details, but neither has.
okay, okay. And we trust you to follow up if they do, right?
Absolutely.
Great, thank you. Any further comments? Question, ready for the question? All in favor? Carried. Next item.
Communication item 1, proposed Freedom Mobile telecommunication monopole antenna and facility located at 700 Walrich Avenue, private property owned by 700 Walrich Inc., part of Lot 15, Concession 1, being parts 1 to 12 on reference plan 52R1636 in Cornwall, and 2910 Marlow Avenue in Cornwall, private property owned by 1757604 Ontario Inc., part of Lot A, and part of west half of Lot B, Concession 1, being parts 1 and 2 on reference plan 52R1951 in Cornwall.
Mover, Counselor Towndale, seconder. Counselor Elaine McDonald, any questions, comments? Counselor Bergeron.
I just have a question in general about these, it's come up a few times, these poles. Does that affect the value of the property of which they are on?
That might be for Mr. Boileau or Madam CAO.
Through you, Madam Mayor, does it affect the value? Both these properties are industrial properties and will be receiving rent for these facilities, and so I think it would increase the values because they're industrial properties. I think if they were, you know, if we were talking about a property that could perhaps affect adjacent properties, perhaps residential properties, for example. But that's not the case here. These are, you know, in excess of half a kilometer away from any residential. So I think if you look specifically at this property, because it's taking in further income, I think it's a greater asset.
Madam CAO would also like to address your question, Councilor Bergeron.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I believe that it would likely increase the value of the property. We have had, in other situations with MPAC, where there's maybe a billboard sign on the property and there's an understanding that there's rental or lease income from advertising on that billboard. That has caused MPAC to take a look at the valuation of that. And so I see this as a very similar situation.
Thank you. Any further question? Councilor Gardner?
I don't know too much about this communications, but the question I'd like to ask is, we have employees actually live in the West End who have no signal for their phones, and I'm wondering if this is going to help them to get out. And I mostly in the Riverdale area, but there are sections where they can't use their cell phones.
Mr. Boileau?
I'm certainly not an expert in answering that question. These are both Freedom